what games did you play when you were young?
When I was a kid, I played the same games everybody played. There was no golf, there was tennis and Fethard, but very few people in our neighbourhood played it. We played hurling and football.
Were there special games for times of the year?
Different games for different times of the year. You played hurling and football whenever you could, whenever the weather was good. Home games like card games and games we'd get at Christmas time, like snakes and ladders and stuff like that. We played them.
Would you go and collect conkers and things like that?
And conkers, yes, that's true. We did have conkers.
Yeah. So most of your playing would have been outdoor.
Outdoor in summertime and in the good weather, and at night during winter we'd play
cards and
stuff like that. Yes.
Where did you live?
We lived right here. The house was a little different then. The whole house was only just this size and had an upstairs. It had a big room downstairs and a small room downstairs, and a big room upstairs and a small room. And the staircase used to be there. We've since turned the house around.
Upside down and inside out.
The types of houses, were they slated or attached?
The houses.
The houses. I only knew one thatched house. Old Jim Hennessy used to live up near the Fort up in Thing, and he had a thatched house. And he was old, even when I was a kid, he was 70 or 80. And when he died, they knocked his house, and he was living on Dulty's land, and they knocked the house and thing, and there's never been a house there. And that was the only thatched house that we knew. Yeah.
Did people leave your area to emigrate to America or any other places?
Places, yes. Mostly England. A lot of people emigrated. Hardly a house around here that didn't have someone in it who did emigrate to it. In fact, when I left here in, I think, 52 or 3, I left with a girl of the Fogartys who earlier gone. She would have been in her early 20s, and she went when she was a teenager, and she got married in England, and she came home with her husband, and I went, when they were going back, I went back with them.
Was that it?
Yeah.
And why did you go? What inspired you to go?
Well, I wasn't any good at school, so there was no academic career ahead of me, and work was impossible to get. I remember I was working thinning beet the day before I left.
And did you mind going? Were you sad to leave?
Oh heck no, I was delighted to adventure the whole thing. I was only 15 at the time. It was a great adventure going away. My sister was in London and I was going to her.
And you went to her?
I did, yes.
And you spent them years in England?
That was 52. I stayed in England until 56 when I joined the Navy. And then I was in the Navy until 63, and then I came home and went to America.
In America then
from 63 to 88.
Were you hearing any old stories around the fire when you were younger?
Actually, I do indeed. That there was no television in those days. Back when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, we had no television, and not everyone had a radio, so you entertained yourself. We'd have people come in, cordiate, and they would sing. Paddy Fox, his son who lives up in Thing, he's a plumber and a very nice man. His father used to come in here and he had a lovely voice. He was very, very popular. He used to go around to all the houses and he'd sing.
Really?
Oh yeah, and they didn't get paid for it, of course, but they'd all prepare food for him and cake and apple tart and everything for him. And they would say, and he was a great singer. He had a lovely voice and he knew the lyrics to hundreds of songs.
And he tells stories as well?
Yeah, he was a kind of a shanachie as well.
Paddy Fox,
yeah, Paddy Fox, yeah, he was.
Right. And how often would he come to your house now, would it be? How often would he come to your house?
Oh, he'd come maybe a couple of times a week.
Oh, wasn't it lovely?
Yeah.
Lovely tradition. Yeah. Would you remember the fairs, Michael?
I do indeed. I used to go to the fair all the time. The fairs were a great event. They were on a Tuesday in Featherton. All the shops would put out a railing in front of the thing. Sullivan's would have a thing, and you'd bring in whatever it was you had for sale, and you'd put a holder. My uncle was bringing in cattle, and my job was with him, and I would hold the cattle there together, and people would come round, jobbers, people they called jobbers, they were professional jobbers, would come round and look at them. And you might sell early, or sometimes you might wait for a better deal, and sometimes you would get a better deal, and sometimes you'd have to drive home whatever you took in.
Okay, so you went in very
Oh
regularly.
yeah, but it was a big day.
And what time in the morning would you go in?
Oh, we'd go in as early as 8 or 9 o'clock, and there'd be people in there. To get a good position, you'd have to go in early.
And do you remember when it stopped? You were gone away, were you?
It was still going on when I left in the 50s. Yeah.
I remember it.
Yeah.
Still going on into the 60s, because I remember.
Yeah, I went on.
And you loved the fair day then?
Oh, I loved the fair. Everyone did. Everyone loved the fair day. The place was a mess with cow dung and all over the place, but they washed all that off and thing next day after was fine.
And how else would the town change? Was there somebody that used to have a little cart and sell? Would you remember that coffee or soup or tea? They probably didn't drink coffee in those days.
At the fair?
Yeah, do you remember that?
I don't think so. I think there were so many shops. There were shops that sold everything.
Yeah.
And the bars, of course, did the biggest business. And there was McCarthy's Hotel was big there because they had very high class meals, but there was other places that did meals, sandwiches and stuff. Scully's did sandwiches and things, and Brett's did. Which
My grandfather's?
Yeah, in your place, yeah. They did sandwiches also.
Yeah.
And special preparations was made for the fair day. That was the biggest day in the month in Fethard. Yeah.
Where did people come from for the fairs?
Oh, they came from all round, from a long way away, from generally within 10 miles of Fethard, but sometimes further. Jobbers, of course, would be coming from a long way away. And sometimes a jobber would buy, if you were in there, would say, 4 young calves and you were selling them, he'd buy those calves and he'd tell you to keep them there until thing, and then he'd go around and he'd sell those at a profit to somebody else.
Oh, really?
So somebody else would take the cattle. Yeah, he would.
Do you eat on a day like that now?
We were very poor, so I didn't eat out. We came home to eat.
So you wouldn't eat all day till you
No, you wouldn't eat all day until you came home, yeah.
And did you say you'd get a few bob for that from whoever?
I did. I was in the steady employment of my uncle up the road, so I didn't get anything extra with the pay.
Yeah. That's good.
Food, yes. What food did we eat? Well, most people were like us. People weren't as wealthy as they are today. Now, today, nearly every family eats meat every day, but we and most of the people in our neighbourhood had meat only once a week on a Sunday, with a pig's head or something on a Sunday, but the rest of the week you wouldn't have meat.
Yeah, just on a Sunday really.
Yeah, and we had fish on a Friday, and something else, sandwiches or something else that my mother would make.
Or soup or whatever.
Yeah.
It was fish and meat maybe one day.
Yeah, fish one day and meat on Sunday. Yeah.
What kind of bread did you eat?
We eat some store bread, but mostly it was my mother would bake, and all mothers that I knew, they were the same thing. They would bake their own bread.
And to be all brown bread, wouldn't it?
It would be, yes, well, my mother baked brown bread and white bread. White soda bread as well, yeah.
Lovely.
Regular soda bread,
Very
yeah.
good. Table thing, Eva?
Where was the table in the kitchen?
Table was where it is now, in the centre of the kitchen. And the kitchen was the centre of activity.
And sorry, I missed the table was in the centre?
In the centre, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And people would be sitting around the table, I suppose, to have
They
a day
would
chatting and talking.
exactly. People would be sitting around the table today. And up there we had a radio. Eventually, the original radios were very old. You had 2 batteries with them, a wet battery and a dry battery. But in the late 40s, or the early 50s, they came with 1 battery, just a dry battery.
And would you sit around as a family and listen to the radio now for the night?
Yes, we would, yes, when the radio came.
Yeah. And play cards and
Yes, and play cards
and the
games.
sing songs and when that
And
man
sing
came
songs
in.
and tell stories and yeah.
You must have happy memories of that kind of life, have you?
I do indeed, yes. People communicated much better then. I mean, everybody spoke to everybody. Now with the advent of television, you find that people don't interact with people as much as they did back then.
Yeah.
Everyone did.
Yeah, it was lovely.
What are the main changes in Fethard for the last 50 years?
Well, let me see. The biggest change I think was that I noticed was no cars when I was your age. There was no cars at all. I remember my sister, who'd be about your age, calling from the road, Mick, come quick, there's a car coming over the road. And we'd rush down and all stand and watch the car going by, because it was unusual to see a car going by. And now there's so many cars that everyone has a car now, it seems.
Is there any traditions associated with castles?
Any traditions of castles? Well, if you want to go back a long way, most of the castles, a lot of the castles in Tipperary belong to the Burgos. They were, when the Normans divided up Ireland, most of Munster was given to our family named the Burkes, the Burgos. But sad to say, after all this time, we've ended up with only a few acres. Those bloody Irish stole all our stuff.
And would you remember Oleg mentioned Cromwell? Is Cromwell there in your notes? Would you remember any of those stories about Cromwell?
About Cromwell, very little. I remember they saying that Fethard surrendered with sickening rapidity, with speed. As soon as he got there, they opened the gates. Come in, Cromwell, come in.
And he was really kind.
Yes, but Clonmel put up a very stiff struggle, but not Fethard.
I think when Fethard heard what happened every place else.
Yes, it seemed to be a very prudent thing to do.
Immigration, like you mentioned that the immigration was big.
It was, yes.
When you left now, that day that you decided you were going, did you was there a party and was there any goodbyes, or were you just kind of gone?
I don't know, there wasn't any party. There was for my sister. My sister a year earlier went to America. My elder sister Elsie went to America. And there was a goodbye party and neighbours came in. I wonder why they didn't do it. I think they were just glad to get rid of me. They said, is he gone? Is he gone yet? I don't think when I first left that I had any definite plans.
Yeah.
I was kind of improvisational. I just went thing. But then when I was working as a bus driver, I knew I could retire in 20 years, and I was there after 5 or 6 years. I began to think, yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll go home, fix up the house when I retire. And I did.
Yeah.
Do you remember any stories about the town wall?
About the town wall? No, but I'm so glad while I was away and since I came back, they've done such a wonderful job of it. It's one of the best things they've done in Fethard since I left was the wall. Yeah. You did ask what the biggest difference was. There didn't seem to be, when I left, there didn't seem to be a welfare system. Nobody got money for, like they do nowadays, for not working. That was unheard of. And I'm not sure it's such a good idea, giving people money for not working. That guy, what's his name in England, who's set fire to his house so he would get a Philpott, yes. I mean, that's a classic example. He was getting something like, 63,000 a year for all his kids and things. And it wasn't as though it was being spent on the kids. The kids were living on crisps. He was taking holidays here and there, and I think there's 67% of the people in England are realising that it needs to be reworked.
Definitely, and it's the same here.
That doesn't have feather, but
yeah. Mike, can I just go back to the fairs, because you know a fair bit, you mightn't know these now, but there's something, when an animal is sold, is luck money given. Was that a tradition?
Yes, always, but that applied not just to animals. Any deal you made, you give luck for it, you got luck with it. It was a negotiating tool. If he was asking, say, £10 and you were offering £8 and you were adamant you'd stick to £8, but I'll give you luck, and you'd give him £1 for luck, so it would be really £9, yeah. But it was that and everything, whatever you bought.
Yeah. So you go in the morning from here, and
yes.
How many cattle might you have with you?
In my uncle's case, we did not many. We usually 5 or 6 calves or something, maybe less than a year old, that he'd be selling.
And he'd go in with the hope of selling out.
Selling them,
and
yes.
Property usually returns.
When people with the jobbers, all the jobbers, there was lots of jobbers, and on a fair day there'd be as many as 20, 30, 40, 50 jobbers maybe. And you'd maybe consider the first deal. You'd see if 2 or 3 jobbers came round to you and they're offering around the same thing, say £5 a beast or something like that, and you say, I don't think I'm going to get any more. And the next guy that comes with £5, you're selling to him. Maybe if you held on, you'd do a little better later in the day, maybe not.
Yes, yeah. And where did the jobbers come from? Did we ask you that already?
Well, there was
The same kind of all over.
They were professional people making their money. Sometimes it might be a farmer who had only a small holding, and he wouldn't make his living on his farm. He'd make his living jobbing. It was a profession. One of my cousins from the Lees from Lochappel was a jobber.
So
Would there have been any jobber that people would say, oh, you know, keep away from him, he won't give you any good bargains, or would everybody have been fair?
They would, because you see, you had to do business as the jobber thing, and there wouldn't be anything about saying, oh, you stay away from him, because there would be too many of them. And if he had such a reputation, he'd get out of that area and go somewhere where he wasn't known. So you wouldn't care. I never remember anyone saying, no, don't. A lot of the jobbers, some of them would be known. And they'd say, oh, he's an honest man, we'll do business with him. And they'd know. It'd be remarkable how many people those jobbers would know. They'd address you by name. My uncle would be there and they'd say, oh, Lara, how are you? And say, I can't give you 10 or so. And say, okay, I'm tired of 10, I'll take that.